Imagine sitting across a table from someone, coffee going cold in your hands, and walking away from that conversation feeling somehow smaller, even though nothing cruel was ever said. No raised voice, no insult, not a single outright lie you could point to afterward. Just a quiet exchange that left you replaying your own words in the dark, wondering where you went wrong. Now imagine a second version of that moment. Different room, different person, maybe a partner, maybe a colleague, maybe someone you trusted completely. You came in with a concern, something specific and real, and you left defending yourself. Not what you said, yourself. Your memory, your tone, your right to have felt what you felt. The original concern? Gone. Dissolved somewhere in the middle. It is architecture. Most people assume manipulation announces itself. They picture someone cornering you, raising their voice, or constructing an obvious lie. But the kind of control we're talking about today never works like that. The most effective form of it is quiet. It arrives in the shape of a question, a slight pause, a mildly surprised expression. Friedrich Nietzsche understood something about power that most people prefer not to look at directly. That the most lasting dominance is never exercised over your body. It is exercised over the story you tell yourself about what just happened. What we are going to examine today are 5 specific verbal tactics, precise instruments of what you might call perceptual capture. Each one is designed not to defeat your argument, but to make you question whether your argument ever had a right to exist. Each one operates differently, but they all share the same target, and that target is not your confidence, not your intelligence. It is something quieter and more foundational than either of those things. Before we get to the tactics themselves, it's worth understanding why this kind of influence works at all. Because the answer is not what most people expect, and it changes everything that follows. If this is the kind of conversation you need right now, consider subscribing. There's more where this came from. Here is what makes these tactics so hard to see in the moment. They operate on something prior to belief, the raw, unprocessed sense of what just happened. The impression you carry out of a room before your mind has had a chance to sort it into language. Think of it this way. Every conversation has 2 layers. There is the surface layer, the actual words, the stated topic, whoever spoke last. And then there is the deeper layer. Who gets to decide what those words mean? Who controls which facts are even allowed to count? Whoever holds that second layer holds everything. They don't need to win the argument. They only need to govern the space in which the argument is allowed to take place. Clinical psychology has a name for one end of this spectrum: systematic doubt induced in a person about their own memory and perception. But that documented extreme is just the visible tip of something much more ordinary and much more common. The everyday version doesn't feel dramatic. It feels like a conversation that somehow went sideways. It feels like being tired in a way you can't explain. Nietzsche observed that the human mind does not encounter the world directly. It encounters interpretations. And the person who supplies your interpretations, quietly, without announcing themselves, is exercising a form of power that leaves no fingerprints, just a gradual shift in what you believe you are permitted to trust about your own experience. That is the engine beneath all 5 of the tactics we're going to examine. Each one is a different instrument for achieving the same thing: epistemic colonization, the slow, patient occupation of the territory between what you witnessed and what you allow yourself to conclude. And the first tactic starts somewhere most people would never think to look. Not in a confrontation, not in an accusation. It starts with a comment about how you speak. The first tactic. And it begins, as I said, not with what was done, but with how you chose to respond to it. You raise something, a concern, an inconsistency, a feeling you've been carrying around for days. And before you've even finished the sentence, the other person's expression shifts, not to anger, not to denial, but to something that looks almost like concern. For you. You always get so intense about things. Or, I don't know why everything has to be this big dramatic moment with you. Maybe just a sigh, and here we go. Notice what just happened. You came in with a subject, you leave with a diagnosis. The conversation didn't move forward, it moved sideways. Suddenly, the question on the table is not what they did or didn't do. The question is whether your emotional response to it is proportionate. Whether you are the kind of person who can be trusted to read a situation clearly. And while you stand there recalibrating, wondering if you are, in fact, being too much, the original concern quietly suffocates in the corner. Nietzsche wrote that the one who cannot refute an argument will instead question the sanity of the person making it. It is a precise description of this move. The tactic doesn't need you to be wrong. It only needs you to become uncertain enough about your own judgment that you stop pressing. The mechanism, laid bare, is this. Your emotional presentation becomes the subject, the original facts become secondary, and your energy shifts entirely towards self-defense. That is conversational frame control in its most common and most quietly devastating form. And when you feel that shift happening, when you notice the subject has changed from what occurred to how you're behaving, you can say, calmly and without heat, "How I'm expressing this isn't the point. Let's stay with what actually happened." That sentence does one thing. It reclaims the frame. The second tactic is more intimate. It doesn't come at your composure. It comes at your conscience. The second tactic doesn't arrive with a sharp edge. It arrives wrapped in something that resembles love. You press a little. You ask for clarity on something that doesn't add up. And the other person doesn't deflect your emotion this time. They reach for history instead. "After everything I've done for you," or quieter, almost hurt, "I've given a lot to this relationship. I didn't think you saw me that way." Sometimes it's even softer than that, just a heaviness in the voice, a long pause, a look that says, "How could you?" What just happened is this. A ledger appeared, and the moment it appeared, the conversation stopped being about the present and became about a debt. Your question didn't get answered. It got reframed as ingratitude. Your doubt didn't get examined. It got converted into evidence that you don't appreciate what you've been given. And now, instead of pursuing the thing that genuinely troubled you, you're in the position of defending your loyalty, your affection, your basic decency as a person. Nietzsche understood guilt as one of the oldest instruments of social leverage, not because it manufactures false emotion, but because it hijacks real emotion and redirects it. The guilt you feel in that moment may be entirely genuine. The affection is real. The gratitude is real. That's exactly what makes this move so effective. It colonizes one you already carry and turns it against your capacity to think clearly. The debt invocation works because it is almost impossible to feel grateful and skeptical at the same time. The manipulator knows this. The ledger isn't raised to settle a score, it's raised to cloud the room. When you feel that fog settling, when the subject has shifted from what happened to what you owe, you can say, "I value what we've built." That's why honesty matters more right now, not less. That sentence holds both things at once. It refuses to let gratitude become a cage. The third tactic is quieter still. It doesn't touch your emotions or your conscience. It goes straight for your memory. Memory is where the third tactic lives, and it is the most disorienting of the three we've covered so far, because it doesn't argue with your feelings or your conscience, it argues with your evidence. You reference something specific. A sentence spoken in a kitchen on a Tuesday, a promise made in a parking lot at dusk, the streetlights just coming on. Something you heard clearly, something you remember with the texture of a real moment. And the response you get is not a counter-argument. It is a quiet, confident denial. "That's not what I said." Or, "You always do this. You get worked up and then your memory fills in the gaps." Sometimes it comes with a clinical edge. "You were upset that night. You weren't in the right headspace to remember things accurately." The mechanism here is precise. It isn't attacking your conclusion, it's attacking your instrument, your memory. The very thing you would use to build any argument at all. And here is why that matters so much. Every act of reasoning depends on trust in what you perceived. Strip that away, and there's nothing left to stand on. You can't hold someone accountable for something you're no longer sure happened. You can't defend a position whose foundations have been made to feel unstable. The documented pattern clinical psychology calls systematic memory doubt operates exactly like this, not as a single dramatic confrontation, but as a slow, repeated process of making you wonder. Nietzsche wrote that the desire to appear right is far weaker than the desire to be believed. And whoever convinces you that your perceptions are unreliable has already won the deeper argument, without ever touching the facts. The counter isn't defensive. It doesn't need to be. You can say simply, "My memory of this is clear. If yours is different, we can talk about that, but I'm not going to dismiss what I know I heard." You're planting a flag in the ground. Now, the fourth tactic is built differently from the first three. It doesn't erode you from within. It constructs a trap around you, and the walls of that trap are made entirely from your own words. The fourth tactic is built from a different kind of material entirely. The first three worked by making you smaller, your tone too much, your gratitude too thin, your memory too unreliable. This one works by making the conversation itself impossible to navigate. You ask something reasonable. You point out that two things don't line up, that an explanation doesn't quite hold, that you'd just like to understand. And the response comes back fast, with a particular quality of wounded disbelief. "So you're saying I'm a liar?" Or, "You think I would actually deceive you?" More like a verdict delivered before any trial. Watch what this does. You had a specific, limited question. Now you are facing something much larger. A characterization of yourself as someone who harbors dark suspicions, who sees dishonesty everywhere, who apparently cannot extend basic trust to the people close to them. The original inconsistency, the one you wanted to discuss, has vanished. In its place is a moral drama, and somehow you are the villain. Nietzsche described this as the creation of a false extreme, forcing your opponent to defend a position they never took, one that sits at the far end of a spectrum far beyond anything they actually said. It is a classic maneuver of conversational frame control. You asked about one specific thing. They responded as though you had accused them of a character that defines their whole person. And now you are busy clarifying, reassuring, backing down, while the original question remains entirely unanswered. The trap is elegant. You either accept the extreme label and argue against it, which means you've already left your original ground, or you retreat out of kindness, and the question dies. The way through is to refuse both exits. You can say, steadily, "I'm not making a statement about who you are. I'm asking about one specific thing. That's all." One question, held calmly. The fifth tactic is the last, and in some ways the most patient. It doesn't arrive when the conversation is heated. It arrives when you're tired. Tiredness is not a flaw. It is a biological fact, and the fifth tactic is built entirely around that fact. By the time this one appears, the conversation has usually been going for a while. Your tone has been questioned. Your conscience has been weighed. Your memory has been disputed. You've had to defend the right to ask a simple question, and now, just as you're feeling the accumulated weight of all of that, the other person sighs, leans back, says something like, "Can we please just move past this?" Or, "I don't know what you want from me. We've been over this 100 times." Maybe even quieter. "I'm exhausted. I thought we were better than this." The mechanism is the deliberate weaponization of your fatigue against your need to understand. Human beings have a deep, genuine aversion to unresolved conflict. The nervous system doesn't distinguish between a threat in the room and a threat in the conversation. It just wants the discomfort to stop. The fifth tactic exploits that. It reframes your desire for clarity as an obsession, your persistence as aggression, your refusal to give up as the actual problem. And after enough rounds of the first four tactics, you are tired enough that the reframe lands. You start to wonder, am I being unreasonable? Is this worth it? Maybe I should just let it go. Nietzsche wrote that the will to power is not always the loudest force in the room. Sometimes it is simply the most patient one. And this tactic is patient. It waits. It conserves energy while you spend yours. It knows that endurance, not argument, is often what determines who walks away holding the truth. The response, when you feel that pull toward premature peace, is quiet and firm. I'm not trying to punish anyone. I just need to understand what happened. I can be patient about how we get there, but I won't stop at the threshold. 5 tactics, 5 mechanisms, 5 moments where a conversation quietly stopped belonging to you. And now that we've named all of them, there's something more important than any single counterphrase, something that connects every one of these moves at the root. So let's look at all 5 of them together as a system. Your tone was too much. Your gratitude was insufficient. Your memory was unreliable. Your question was an accusation. Your persistence was the real problem. Different words, different moments, different emotional textures, but look at what each one actually did. Every single move landed in the same place, the gap between what you experienced and your right to trust that experience. That is the architecture. Each of these tactics is a different key, but they all open the same door. And behind that door is the thing the manipulator actually wants. Not your agreement, not your silence, not even your surrender on a specific point. What they want is for you to become the primary source of your own doubt. Because a person who doubts themselves thoroughly enough will eventually do the work of control without any external pressure at all. They'll second-guess before they speak. They'll soften before they've even framed the question. They'll preemptively retreat from their own perceptions. Nietzsche called this the internalization of the jailer. The moment a person has absorbed enough external judgment, they no longer need anyone to constrain them. They do it themselves, automatically, out of habit. That is what these 5 moves are working toward, collectively. A rewired relationship with your own inner life. And here is where the anchor fact from clinical psychology becomes more than theoretical. Individuals with stable self-certainty, people who have a settled, practiced trust in their own perceptions, are significantly harder to reach with these tactics because the tactics depend on a gap that simply isn't wide enough to work with. The mechanism of perceptual capture requires purchase. It needs somewhere to grip. And in a person who has learned to treat their own observations as a starting point rather than a question, there is almost nothing to hold on to. That's the real implication of everything we've covered. The defense isn't a better script, it's a different relationship with what you know. But what does that actually look like, in practice, in a real conversation, in the moment when the pressure arrives? It looks like this. Someone says something that doesn't sit right, a phrase designed to make your tone the issue, or to invoke the debt ledger, or to quietly revise what you both know happened. And instead of the familiar lurch of self-doubt, instead of the internal scramble to recalibrate, you notice a different sensation. A kind of stillness, just the feeling of standing on ground that doesn't shift under pressure. That stillness is what the inner certainty shield actually feels like from the inside. Not a wall you put up, more like a floor you've learned to trust. And here is the key distinction, the one that matters most practically. This is not the same as being stubborn. A stubborn person refuses to update regardless of evidence. The inner certainty shield does the opposite. It holds your perception steady long enough for you to examine the evidence properly without someone else's urgency rewriting the story before you've had a chance to read it yourself. The difference between stubbornness and groundedness is the same as the difference between a locked door and a door with a handle on the inside. One keeps everything out by default. The other opens, but only when you decide to open it, from where you stand, on your terms. Nietzsche made a distinction between those who react and those who respond, between people who are moved by the first pressure that touches them and those who pause long enough to choose their direction. The pause is sovereignty. And the way you build it is not by becoming harder or louder or more suspicious of everyone around you. You build it by practicing one simple thing, returning to what you actually observed before anyone has had a chance to annotate it. The bare fact of the moment, the specific word that was used, the look on a face, the thing that made your chest tighten before your mind started searching for reasons to explain it away. That practice, small, quiet, unglamorous, is what makes the difference between a conversation you walk out of feeling smaller and one where you stay the same size you walked in. But knowing this and feeling it when it counts, those are not the same thing. And the distance between them is where the last piece of this belongs. The distance between knowing and feeling, that gap, closes through repetition, not revelation. Through the small, daily practice of noticing when something inside you tightens and choosing, just for a moment, not to explain it away before you've actually looked at it. That is what makes these 5 tactics, taken together, something more than a catalog of manipulation. They are a map of the exact places where most people abandon their own perceptions out of kindness or exhaustion or the simple desire to be fair. The tone accusation works because you care about not being too much. The debt invocation works because your gratitude is genuine. The memory challenge works because you know you're not infallible. The false binary works because you don't want to be the kind of person who suspects everyone. And the attrition tactic works because you are tired and peace sounds better than truth. They are, in fact, the marks of a decent person. And that is precisely why these moves target them. Nietzsche wrote that the strength of a person is not measured by what they withstand, but by what they refuse to let redefine them. The person who walks out of a difficult conversation still holding their own account of what happened, not rigidly, not defensively, but steadily, that person has not lost the most important ground. The 5 moves we examine today all belong to the same family of pressure. They are, each of them, an invitation to hand over the authorship of your own experience. And you are allowed to decline. You don't have to be unshakable. You don't have to be certain about everything. You just have to be the last one to rewrite what you saw with your own eyes. There's a particular quality to the silence after a conversation where you held your ground without raising your voice. The room feels the same. The other person is still there, but something has not moved that they expected to move. That unmoved thing is yours.